Hello friends, I am so excited to tell you about Independent Media Token. Independent Media Token is a brand new way to show your support for independent media without having to donate a dime. Independent Media Token is a cryptocurrency on the Solana blockchain designed to generate funds to promote and foster the growth of independent content creators, allowing them to engage in their art without having to worry about being demonetized. Through a network of media partners, of which you yourself can become a part of, Independent Media Token's goal is to ensure the powers that be can never cut off all of our areas of funding and censor the only free voices left in the world. Join the movement today. You can pick up Independent Media Token using Phantom Wallet or the Solana wallet of your choice, where you can easily swap your Solana for IMT. Grab some IMT today and remember to always know your team. To learn more, visit independentmediatoken.com or use the link right in the description.
I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Tim Constantine. Check out my films. Doors of Perception is on Amazon Prime. Occult Louisiana is on Tubi, Apple, Roku channel, and many more. We are booking guests for January. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome Tim Constantine. He is a researcher, amateur historian, and host of 6th Century Podcast. Tim, welcome. How you doing?
Hey, Chris, doing great. Happy to be here and happy to get into whatever we're going to get into tonight.
Yeah, man, really looking forward to this. I understand you've been looking into the secret occult history of the United States, some of the key figures throughout history that have contributed to the founding of the United States, and the hidden esoteric ideologies that have shaped society. There are so many questions that go into this, more questions than answers than I've ever gotten, and the possibility that the destiny of this country has been planned for possibly over 1,000 years is fascinating. So lots to get into here. Before we do, this is your first time on. Tell us a little bit about yourself and let the audience know how they can find out more.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, you hit on a lot of good things there that I want to expound on. But first, yeah, I'm Tim Constantine. My show is 6th Century Podcast. I have to spell it out because people get really inventive with that. So it's spelled SIX, like the number 6, but not the number 6. 6th Century Podcast. I'm on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, Instagram, and Patreon. And I think like many people, well, maybe I'll go back. I've always had a fascination with the unknown as far back as I can remember. And I've always had weird experiences with that sort of a thing. But like a lot of people, it was, the pandemic in 2020 and all that. I won't regale everybody. We were all there. We all went through it. That really, really put me over the edge. And that's how I got really into this stuff. That's where my podcast was born. But yeah, it's all this, it's the occult nature of things, the hidden history, ancient technology, just mystery and history and everything unknown that I'm all about.
I love it, man. Well, when it comes to some of the things that you've been looking into and the secret occult history of the founding of the United States, how far back would you go whenever trying to understand the beginnings of this possible plan for America?
Yeah, well, I think every time I look into it, it goes back further. But I would go back to the
Mm.
Greeks at least. Plutarch seemed to be, well, they knew about the St. Lawrence River. That Plutarch's time was around 70 AD. And in his writings, we find that they knew about the Great Lakes and the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, and that you could come down, and they knew about this magical sort of unknown land in the Western Hemisphere. And of course, it's the Greeks where we get our the baton passing of the legend of Atlantis. So those two, I find that those two ideas get kind of pushed together sometimes. You have the old empire of the past, the old mystical empire of the past known as Atlantis, and then the philosophical empire of the future that a lot of the orders were seemingly like on a trajectory towards. So, and I could break all that down, but I would say the Greeks. I mean, even the well, you know what? I think the Phoenicians were over here
Mhm.
too, if we're being honest, and they would have probably been here first. I've seen a lot of evidence for Egyptians over here in North America as well. So who really knows how far back this
Mhm.
goes? Of course, the story we're told is Columbus, and that's easily debunkable these days. I mean, go no further than the Vikings in around 1000 AD. If you go up and look at Newfoundland and an area called Lonssaw Meadows, you can Wikipedia that one, and it'll show you that they were
Mhm.
here well before Columbus.
It's most likely that at some point in our ancient past, possibly many points, they had previous advanced civilizations that colonized here before, and there's more and more evidence of that coming out based on some of the research that independent researchers are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I started with the Greeks. I know I'm well versed in the Phoenicians and all that. I've really studied that. But I think I went with Greeks to answer your question first, just because it's fresh in my mind. I was reading something earlier today about Atalanta, the Greek sort of goddess huntress of Arcadia, Arcadia being the mountains in Greece. And it sounds like Atlanta, the city. It's one letter removed, and you have Atlanta, the city. And of course, Atlanta is on a river, and there's some confluence of waterways there in Georgia. Of course, I found in some of my research that there was an old city on the coast of Georgia called Frederica. You can look that up, but you'll never hear about it in history class. So all when you start to look at even just dial in on places in the country. Like I'm in Tennessee. We've got Sparta, Tennessee. We've got Athens,
Mhm.
Tennessee. We've got a 49-foot statue of Athena
Right.
in Nashville. The Greek influence over here is crazy, and I've never heard anybody give me a a good reason for why these are named what they're named.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I think I just went
No,
all over
that's
the
okay.
place on
For
you
the
there,
sake of this
but
conversation, because there's so many layers and there's so much we could get to,
right.
let's stick with some of the talking points that you sent me. You sent me a
Okay.
list of very powerful players throughout history that had influence in the formation of the United States, whether they were directly involved or pre planning before. Let's start with some of those throughout history. Sir Thomas Gates, John Dee, Queen Elizabeth. That might be a good place to start.
Well, I think I'll warm up to that because I want to
Yeah,
start with just the overall
sure, sure.
order itself. I think everybody you just mentioned is in or was a part of the order, what I call the order with a capital
Mhm.
O. And I think this is the order that all the others branched off of.
All right.
And this goes back to Sumer,
Mhm.
Egypt, you know, the Akkadians. It goes all the way back to the Middle East. But I think, it's passed on like a baton through Phoenicia and through the Greeks and all that. And I think that I included on there, just to make this point in the talking points, I think I included the dollar
Yeah,
bill
yeah.
decode stuff. Well, the only reason why I'm bringing that up is because I think if you look at the dollar bill in the center, you have the seal. Yeah, everybody knows that. It's got the
Hmm.
pyramid in the seal. And you have a phrase there which is Novus Ordo Seclorum. That means a new order of the ages. And I think of that as order with a capital O. I think they exclusively phrase it that way as a way of saying we are the new order, the new occult
Mm.
empire in town. We're the new Babylon, the new Rome, we're the new Atlantis. So it's, yeah, Norvo Ordo Seclorum. And I think it's the order encoded itself in that phrase because they took that from the Romans. It's a Roman poem about the returning reign of Saturn. And the poem says they change. It says the great cycle of the ages is born anew, and for the dollar bill they changed great cycle to new order. So great cycle of the ages born great wow, I tongue tied that, but I
Yeah,
think you
yeah.
see what I'm saying, right? It's like it's a nod to the order that has been around through the ages. There we
Right.
go. Hall, who I've been reading a lot of, Manly P. Hall, called that the order of the quest. So I think there's a long time relationship here with this order and the running and procurement of
Mm.
government. And I think too that there's a congruity of priestcraft and statecraft. That they when they formed America, they brought all that in, and it goes way back to pick your empire. It's empire lineage. This order existed throughout
Hmm.
time in the empire lineage. And yeah, a lot of these names like Elizabeth and Thomas Gates. Thomas Gates founded the colony of Jamestown, or at least he was the governor, the first governor of Jamestown. And when you look into them, there's a milieu there. But I think what you see is that there's secret society and government, and there's that connection a lot in this country. And I think by the time you get to the 1880s, you see Blavatsky and Steiner sort of commenting on
Hmm.
that. They said that the 1880s American political system, the machine of American politics, was almost completely controlled by the secret societies to the point where it was 80 to 90% controlled. Well, that goes back to the priestcraft of the
Mm.
Egyptians, which Hall wrote about in Secret Teachings, where these shamanic priests learn how to control large swaths of the populace through propaganda spellcraft, propaganda control, population control. And I actually have a quote here from, I think this might sum it up. This is Hall, quote from Manly P. Hall. He says, in Egypt, Greece, India, and China, the state mysteries came into existence. Orders of initiated priest philosophers were formed as a sovereign body to instruct, advise, and direct the rulers of the state. And I notice he says orders there. I think he's doing that intentionally. So
Mm.
it's the American secret societies of the late 1800s. I would suggest had a memory of this, and that this was all preserved knowledge held in the lineage of the older order. And I think that the Templars, the Masons, the Rosicrucians split off of that older order.
Hmm.
Yeah, the Templars in 1100, Rosicrucians, what was it, 1610, Masons in the 1700s. And these groups didn't simply appear out of thin air, but they materialized from a much older order that, like I said before, I think goes back to Egypt, Babylon, Sumer. I think all these other big, I'll tie a bow on it. I think a lot of these names that we were mentioned a minute ago, they were just, I don't want to call them pawns, but they were just doing their part for the order. If you follow this as a thought
Hmm.
experiment, okay, I'm not saying that this is 100% the way it is, but this is a theory that Hall put forth. And I think it's a fun thought experiment. And I think that the more you look into it, the more you see that, oh, there's something here to this.
Do you think all our modern day secret societies, Masons, Rosicrucians, Templars, were all offshoots of this original order that you're referring to?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think that, yeah, because if you look at the Templars, that's 1100s. That kicks off with Godfrey and Hugh de Paynes. think I got that right. And then they teamed up later with Bernard de Clairvaux. But the Hugh DePayne's and Godfrey's, uh, I'm trying to get their names right. It's Hugh DePayne's and Godfrey Saint Omar, I think. They were initiated by other cultists. So they were brought into this information. They were brought in by the order. So what I'm saying is like the first two Templars, before they went to Jerusalem, were initiated in, I think it was Istanbul, by a Greek order. And it was this older Greek order that said, here's your mission, Templars. You're now Templars. Go, we're going to get you set up in Jerusalem. And what you're to do is to look for evidence of our order going back to Atlantis, going back to Anunnaki times and all that. So that's, yes, I think all this split off of that. And even like Washington,
Mm.
if you get back to where, you know, with the creation of this country, he was a Freemason. Of
Yep.
course. I mean, no doubt about that. I mean, when you look at the temple built for Washington overlooking Alexandria, Virginia, like the eighth wonder of the world, it just looms over this town. That isn't a legacy to Christianity. He wasn't a man of the faith. He was a man of the order.
When we are talking about the ideologies that have shaped our country, how close do you think where we're headed is the original plan for this land, for this country? And what is really spiritually behind this? Are they just trying to achieve ultimate power and influence over the rest of society? Are they trying to trigger some kind of evolution in humanity? There's many different theories as to why they've chosen to do it this way in secrecy under the guise of a Christian nation.
Yeah, I do think it was under the guise of Protestant, sort of like
Mm.
Protestantism. There was only one Catholic guy, I think, that signed, so it wasn't the Catholics. And I think that this was their way of preserving their rights to worship whatever they wanted to
Mm.
worship. There's a very, very pungent thread of goddess worship when you look into this that these guys all held to. But to your question, to the overall, yeah, I don't know. I think that this was a I think they did a good job with putting all this together. I mean, God bless the Constitution. It
Yeah.
gave because yeah, I don't think it was originally a Christian nation. I think that's something that people believe it is now, but they gave Christians the right to take ownership of it, I guess, and to we all have the freedom to worship however we want, even though I think it was meant for pagan worship to be allowed, and all that. And I don't know where all this is going. I think all this was supposed to go to New Atlantis.
What do you think the idea is for the new Atlantis, for at least for this group?
Hmm. It was a utopian occult empire, a utopian occult philosophical empire. It was supposed to be the revival of Atlantis, which is why I think they kept the term Atlantis in the title, just added
Yeah.
new to it. And, going back to this order, if you look at that book, New Atlantis, that was written by Sir Francis Bacon, who I believe was in the order. And so I think he was just doing his part. He wrote that book and it was talking about, just the revival of a utopic. That word has gotten sort of skewed lately. People think of that in a negative light. I think people associate that with communism. I think it meant something different to these people. I think it meant freedom and a land of blessings, the Hesperides sort of a thing. So I think they use utopia differently. I think it was just let's all work towards this goal of this philosophical occult empire where everybody can worship what they want and we'll have freedom. We'll be out from underneath the crown, we'll be out from underneath the church, and we'll just have overall freedom to do what we want. And that was de-encoded almost in, I think, in Sir Francis Bacon's New Atlantis. And then 150 years later, you see Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, the guys who started this country, all reading that book, almost as if they were playing out a script that was sort of handed to them
Yeah, yeah.
esoterically in that book. Yeah. I mean, you can look at, but there's also like a darker side to this too. I think once you get to, I'll talk about maybe the Vanderbilt obelisk a little
Hmm.
bit because that's got some. I don't. Once you get to some of these Rockefellers and Vanderbilts and all that,
Yeah.
it's like the thing got. I don't know. It's like the Star Wars, like the light side and the dark. It's like the dark side started
I have to
winning
wonder
here.
if there was an infiltration, if at some point,
Yeah.
like you said, the dark side took over. Maybe originally they did have decent intentions for the outcome of the United States, but some
Hmm.
anti human ideologies crept in there, some sort of parasitic influence of some kind. I'd like to get into that later. You have Steiner in your talking points. I think he gave a great
Hmm.
warning about the future of technology and where that's headed. But it's very interesting to see where we are now when looking at the possibilities of the original idea of where we could have been.
Yeah, I think you nailed it when you said parasitic. I think that there was almost like an outside alien force that kind of came in, and it's interesting because a couple weeks ago I was reading this letter that George Washington was writing with a friend. George was over here, of course, and he's exchanging letters with a guy over in Europe. And his friend in Europe, another man of the order, was warning Washington. He's like, "Hey, have you heard about this Bavarian Illuminati
Mm,
that just popped up? They're a bunch of godless infidels. What are we going to do about this?" He's and he started warning George Washington. He was like, "These guys might infiltrate your Masonic
yeah.
order. What are you going to do to stop that?" And Washington's reply to him a couple letters later was, "Well, I've got the situation over here under control." But I just think it's interesting that was
Yeah.
looming over them in the 1770s, 1780s. And I have to wonder, like, it's like they knew that this Bavarian Illuminati was on a on a crusade to take over governments and politics and occult orders
Mm.
everywhere in a very parasitic manner. So I have to wonder if maybe by the time Washington sort of passes away, if he wasn't able to, maybe he was able to push them off for a little bit, but I have to think that they probably infiltrated over here at some point. And I think they did infiltrate the Masonic lodges over here. And I think you see that in Vanderbilt's
Mm.
obelisk
Yeah, talk a little bit
and
about that.
just that family. Yeah, okay. So there's a lot of encrypted meaning to that obelisk. It makes an alignment. Okay, let me back up. It's called Cleopatra's Needle. He brought it over. It's huge, but somehow they got it on a boat and they brought it over here from Egypt and they set it up in New York
Yeah.
City in Central Park. It's part of the grounds of the Met Gala, which we could, that'd be a fun. I don't know. We all know how weird that gets these days. But he sets it up in 1881, I believe. And what we found is that it makes an alignment with a couple other obelisks in New York. It aligns with General Worth Square and St. Paul's Cathedral, mysterious sort of old church there. And a lot of this is laid out in American Nation of the Goddess. I want to shout that book out. But what it does is it reflects the belt stars of Orion, which is the resting place of Osiris to the Egyptians. It's also reflective of the Eye of Horus, aka Aldebaran, and it's where you get into the ancient Aldebaran star knowledge that I think the elites used to plan out big events, plan out the start to company, plan out when to sell, when to buy stocks, all that because Aldebaran star knowledge is like when Aldebaran is, well, how's it go? When it's eclipsed by the moon, that's a bad time to do big things. When it's over the moon, that's when you do big things, stage big events, start the startup that you've been wanting, all that. It's in the nursery rhyme, Hey Diddle Diddle, Cat in the Fiddle. Cow jumped over the moon. The cow is Taurus. The cow
Oh
is sort
yeah.
of representative of Aldebaran. So there's this, and there's also on top of all that, there's association with the goddess Isis. So what's the point here? The point here is that Vanderbilt and his version of Freemasonry in the 1880s knew all about Egyptian cosmology. And he was one of these uh, industrialist robber baron types. Like the direction that these guys shifted the country, and especially the Rockefellers, but the Vanderbilts as well, is one of propaganda and profiting off of everybody else, sort of turning everybody into these materialist slaves. We're just stuck in a system. We have to, I could go down a whole rabbit hole with that. But anyway, the point though is that they knew Egyptian cosmology and they were very clued into this stuff. And they don't seem to be good guys the more you study the Vanderbilts. And I think it's just interesting. You had the Vanderbilt women at parties dressing up like goddesses, holding doves. Uh, Doves is representative of Ishtar and Venus. And like I said before, there's a very potent goddess thread or a thread of goddess worship here to these people. And even DC, this is just a little bit of an occult decode of the matter. And maybe we can get back on course with like what it all means in a second. But you have Washington, D.C., District of Columbia. Columbia is Latin for dove. So everywhere you turn, there's goddess worship stuff here, along with the Egyptian cosmology, and you even have what comes to mind in the moment here is Columbia Pictures. They have the
Yeah.
lady that holds up that it looks like the Statue of Liberty. That's all Isis Ishtar associated symbolism, and that even the Statue of Liberty was brought over. It was being built in Egypt as well, like the obelisk. It came over from Egypt eventually, or yeah. And so I think you have a lot of Isis in here and just a lot of old Egyptian stuff. And Venus was important to the Templars, and I could just go on a whole thing with that. But the point is like they knew the knowledge. It's like what have they done with it and were they infiltrated? And I think that yes, I think that they were infiltrated. And I think they knew this goes almost a step further, a step deeper, and in lines with literally aligns with ancient America because that obelisk that Vanderbilt put in also aligns with Castle Clinton. It's a it's right on the point of Manhattan. And I looked into that, and that goes back. I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Maybe the Greeks or the Phoenicians came over here and were putting forts over here before Columbus.
Hmm.
And somehow Vanderbilt had his obelisk aligned with this old star fort called Castle Clinton. Now, if you look into it today, they've built up on top of that star fort and said that it was built in the 1800s by a guy named Joseph Totten, but that's just a cover story.
Yeah.
Because so this is where we go back to like where we started this thing with the ancient America ties. It's like how did the occult order that was running the country in the 1880s know about the occult order that was here way, way, way long time ago, putting star forts in New York Harbor?
Right.
Because Totten was um so here's the deal. They said he built that in 1788, I think. But but that star fort is on maps from the
Hmm.
1600s, early 1600s. So he couldn't have built it. It was there before he was born. So they were bringing Totten in to claim that he built ancient sites and have him build on top of them to cover up their existence
Mm.
almost. And he's also the guy who they say built that Fort Jefferson, the weird fort down in the
Yeah.
Tortugas out in the middle of the ocean.
Yeah.
So there's there are these older sites over here that we don't know they're older because that part's been hidden from us. But the Vanderbilts knew about it, and the Rockefellers did as well. They signed. Rockefeller did the whole, what is it? The monetary
Hmm.
system, the Federal Reserve. They did that from Jekyll Island. That was an ancient site that the Timucua tribe had set up. They had an altar out there and everything. They were doing what we would call worship reminiscent of Canaanite practices.
Mm.
And let's see, Rockefeller and another guy had this, they called it Indian Mound Cabin. And it's allegedly where they signed or they had that secret meeting for the Federal Reserve. And that cabin was built right on top of the old Temecula altar. And it's like, I don't think that's a
Yeah.
coincidence. How did they know about
Yeah,
this
you look
stuff?
at
Well,
the
they knew. They're
mounds
clued
that are
in.
found across the United States. I
Hmm.
featured a bit about it in my movie Occult Louisiana. I had Dr. Gregory Little on to talk a little bit about the real possible history of these mounds. He believes could go back to the times of Atlantis, that maybe the mound builders were also the precursor builders to things like the Great Pyramid, and they were part of this advanced global civilization. And the mounds had much deeper and more profound uses than just burial sites.
Oh, absolutely. I was reading something the other day about Edgar Casey talking about that. He had a a reading. I don't want to call it a theory because we know kind of how he got his information. And
Yeah.
he received some information in a reading that the mound builders were setting up some of their mound complexes as an intentional nod to
Mm-hmm.
Atlantis. And if you go deeper into that, there's a lot of legends that some of the inhabitants of Atlantis survived whatever cataclysm destroyed them and made their way down, possibly through Greenland, possibly through modern day Canada into North America. And some of these more mystical elements that the Cherokee spoke of, even like the Cherokee Little People,
Yeah.
were at one point their descendants were from Atlantis. Same thing for the mound builders. And I mean, I think that you brought up a great point there with that. That's kind of what I was getting at here, Chris. It's like there's a connection here between the mound builders and the order that I think Washington
Mm.
represented, because Washington started his own secret society, which I would say is a branch off of the Maine, of course, but he started the Society of
Yeah.
Cincinnati, and they started that before they started the country. So it's like a secret order came over here, took power first, and said, "Okay, we got it. We're sort of hammering down the stake here. We got the flag in the ground. We're taking over." And what you see is members of the Society of Cincinnati. Well, for instance, Washington and Henry Knox picked the location for Cincinnati, the city, and they picked it because it was a mound builder location. They went in there and they cleared an ancient site from 900 AD and put Cincinnati right on top of
Mm.
it. Why did Washington and Henry Knox pick that location? And Washington himself bought land in Point Pleasant. We all know about how mystical Point Pleasant is.
Yeah.
Washington bought land in Serpent Mound.
Well.
They named the county that Serpent Mound is in Loudoun County after Loudoun County, Virginia, where they're from. Well, how did Washington know about all this? There's a link there between these guys and the new Atlantis of Bacon's progenitorship and the old Atlantis where all the legends came from. And the mound builders are in there in that lineage somewhere. I mean, this goes so deep. It's like there's a club of insiders here, and it has to be. The elites knew about the occult
Mm.
sites. I mean, you've got this was all over the country. They found macaw feathers in Utah and ruins galore. That's Aztec stuff. All those city settlements out there that the Mormons picked are right on top of Aztec settlements. How did they know to do that? Salt Lake City on an Aztec settlement. And it was, I think it was because the early Mormons were Freemasons.
Right. Yeah.
So there's knowledge there that we just don't know about that they've been playing with for millennia, down to where they pick their their settlements. And I mean, Anasazi sites out there in Utah as well. The Anasazi, I mean, I've seen some people say that that goes back to 8,000 years. And you've got Mormon towns right on top of the Anasazi settlements. This is a big deal. Washington, so Washington knows about it. He puts DC, Cincinnati, Washington, PA, and a couple other places on right on top of ruins slash mound
Mhm.
sites. This is that deep. And I think this pulls the car right up to talking about Secret Destiny of America by
Yeah.
Hall, if we wanted to go more deep into
It is
that, you know.
very interesting how they built the original institutions and continued to on seemingly places of very high potency and power, ley lines, things of that nature. The first computer near Susquehanna, several other modern institutions that were built on supposedly ley lines and places of power. It makes you wonder the effect that that could have.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. The Susquehanna River, very
Mhm.
mystical. That was named after the Susquehannock people who were giants. They were said to
Yeah.
be, well, or we could say men of tall stature, you know, they were, but I think it was even John Smith who came over here and had interactions with them, and they were said to be 7 to 8 feet. They were mound builder descendants. And I mean, I haven't really announced this project yet, but I'm working on a book.
All right,
I'm
on.
hoping to do a book. So I've got a bunch of material here that's set aside for that. And I'll allude to it right now because I do want this to kind of come out in the book. But there's one story I found in particular about the Susquehannock, that river, those people, that region. And there is the last eight Susquehanna giants were killed off by this regime that took over
Really?
the country. Yeah, and I'm
Wow.
gonna leave the rest for the book, I think. But it goes that deep, and I think that's a very mystical place too. Like to your point, that the first computer what comes out of there is
Yeah.
that they design like
I
chips or
think it
something out of
was
there.
the first processor.
Oh, anytime I look into technology, I see the same connections that we're talking about today. There's a totally an occult connection behind the rise of this
Yeah,
technology.
let's get into
All of
that.
it.
The anti human nature of our technological systems, where we are now as a collective, and the obvious direction that they are trying to steer us in this transhuman way. Talk a little bit about Steiner's warning, the modern influences that brought us here. You always see that the direction they want to head is always outlined in literature, in white papers, in documents, in early novels, books. They always have it planned out and it's always available for the public to see. It's very interesting how
Mhm.
they do that. Maybe it's revelation of the method, but these dark agendas have been at play for a very long time. People most likely just viewed it as fiction until just recently when people started to realize how corrupt our systems are, at least more people than of recent history. Talk a little bit about how we got here and your understanding of the steering of society so far.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd love to get into the technology the technology aspect to this. But you said Steiner, so I want to at least comment
Yeah.
on that. And I'm a little bit rusty on this, but I'm thinking about Steiner's work, and I've read a lot of his work, and I've listened to a lot of of lectures of his, and I'm familiar somewhat with the eighth sphere, I believe is what he called it, which held a lot of weird predictions that he. So Steiner died in 1923, I think, 20 somewhere between 23 and 25, and in his eighth sphere work, he talks about the coming of an entity called Ahriman,
Yeah.
and the way he lays that out, you kind of have to go listen to lectures, multiple lectures, and look at multiple writings and put them all together to see the big picture of what he's saying. It's almost like a puzzle. But once you have the pieces together, what I think Steiner was saying with Ahriman was that there was this coming intelligence, and it wasn't good. It was like a menace to the globe, and it was going to come, and it was going to, first of all, it was going to feed us technology. Oh, here's how you do this, like what people say happened with Roswell. If you look into some of that work with what is it, Bell Labs,
Yeah.
as soon as Roswell happened, Bell Labs starts making all these weird circuitry devices and computer chips and things that we would use to build the internet. That's kind of what Steiner was saying was going to happen. And he said, so not only is it going to feed us the technology and give us the means to build a computer, but it's going to then manifest itself through the technology and start to control us as a society through the technology. And of course, I don't have to spell that out to people
Yeah.
today. They didn't know what he was talking about pre 1920s. But now that's just where we're at with Neuralink and AI and everything else. It's on us. So the work of Steiner seemed to be very prophetic in that sense, and it comes to that. And I think that this stuff that we talked about today, the new Atlantis stuff, the Manly P. Hall stuff, it seems like it runs right alongside of the technological advancements that we're witnessing. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to set that up, but I think that
Do you think that Manly P. Hall was aware that we would take technology to a dangerous level, at least a level that is a threat to humanity?
he seemed to always have those concerns for the overall good of humanity. And I haven't seen him, like Steiner, I've listened to many of his lectures
Hmm.
and I've read a lot of Hall stuff. And I'm not thinking of anything in particular where he warned explicitly about technology, but overall, yeah, he did that with his overall aura. He was always concerned about the good of man.
Yeah.
Um, that's a vibe that I've always gotten from Hall. And I think he was saying to us when he talked about how Francis Bacon New Atlantis was never really finished. It's said that there's a second piece out there floating around. There might be a clue in that. Because I do think that George Washington thought that, especially when he was, here's a very esoteric story for you. When Washington was receiving his visions, he said that an entity came to him in the night and was calling him the child of the Republic and was saying, "You're going to do big things here." I think in his gut, he thought that he was building the new
Mm.
Atlantis. I do. But I'm wondering if this was meant to be unfinished for a while and that New America was meant to be the stepping stone to build New Atlantis. Because maybe New Atlantis wasn't supposed to even come around until the technology came around. It's got to be a fusion. The philosophical empire was meant to be one of high math and high science and high technology, like it was said to be back in the day, in the days of Atlantis. So I think that where this is heading now, when you look at Greenland, that might be the site of the new Atlantis. If we're going to follow this thought experiment all the way through and go deep as possible here, I think it's because who's looking at Greenland? All the big tech guys. Trump, big
Yeah.
time. He wants to get Greenland from Denmark. All the guys, Chris, all the guys at the inauguration, some of those guys who turned from Democrats to Republicans overnight. That's
Yeah.
interesting. They had they have big money staked up in this Greenland project. They've all invested millions in the Greenland project, and that's the top of Greenland is the North Pole. That's where Hyperborea, Atlantis, Stool, all that was said to be. So, and Reuters put out this quote the other day about what they want to do in Greenland, and it's, AI hub, a underground light rail, all kinds of just 15 minutes futuristic super city stuff.
Yeah.
That's what they want to do up there. So I'm wondering is Greenland to be the site of the new Atlantis for real? And that's going to be this new world order that everybody's always talking about. Because Nostradamus, another man of the order, said that in the 21st century, right now, that two world powers would unite over the North Pole. And you
Interesting.
see Putin
Yeah.
and Trump talking about what plans with the North Pole, essentially with Greenland. Putin's out there saying, "Yeah, Trump's got big plans for Greenland, and he's going to do it." That's all he's saying. He's clearly not against it. So there's something happening here with Greenland. I really believe that, and I think that it's the merger of this new Atlantis concept with the technology.
What are your thoughts on some of the recent theories that have been popping up about Tartaria, in a sense that there was an advanced civilization in our recent past that our ruling class proceeded to destroy and reset and then rebuild with a brand new history and manufactured sciences and manufactured education systems just to have this new level of control over the entire planet, basically. It's a fascinating story. There's some interesting evidence that has come out, but I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I've been looking into Tartaria a little bit more lately, and I'm not a full Tartarian guy, but I like to take some of that and
Hmm.
work with it. I mean, they're on to something. I just don't think the overall picture is there
Yeah.
yet. But um, so it's like JJ Vance says, because I do shows with him occasionally, and he's like, you can't get a full picture of what really happened, regardless of a reset or including a reset without including the mound builders. You have to have, if you're going to have reset and that whole lost civilization thing on the table, I think you have to have mound builders on the table right alongside of it to understand what really happened here. I don't think that there was a reset personally. If there was, it was before 1100 AD, in my opinion, because the I've looked at bloodlines, and somebody I know is a part of a bloodline. All their ancestors are queens. Basically, it's a matriarchal bloodline, and they wanted me to help them look into it. So I looked into it, and I was able to trace the person I know back through this matriarchal bloodlines, and that bloodline didn't start getting hazy until around 1100 AD. But it was perfectly on for that 1,000 years, is almost 1,000 years. And these elites take that super seriously. The one thing that you don't mess with is the bloodline. They take that super seriously. That's why I don't think that there was a reset since 1100 AD, because I don't know how they would keep track of things. You can look at their bloodlines and see that the last 1100 or last 1,000 years have been relatively straightforward, I think. That's my opinion on that. But yeah, there's ancient civilizations over here in North America for sure. I just don't think it was Tartaria, but there was a Tartaria. That's why this thing is super convoluted. It's kind of
Yeah.
hard to dissect all this. Yeah, I mean, Tartaria was a real place. I looked into it. I don't have the dates perfect here, but they sacked Russia, I think St. Petersburg, in, I don't know, the 1500s, and then they sacked them again. Maybe it was like to 1200, something like that. There's been twice in the last 1,000 years where a group of people called the Tartarians came in and pillaged Russia. That's probably why they've been wiped off the face of the planet as far as historical memory goes. The Russians probably got back at them
Mm.
for
Yeah.
for trying to conquer them. That's my theory. That's my working theory
Yeah.
on that. But we can call it Tartaria if you want. Like, I mean, people out there listening, like, yeah, there were ancient civilizations over here all over the place. They put our cities right on top of them, like Cincinnati, like we talked about earlier. That was on an ancient civilization that goes back to the four ancient people, 900
Mm.
AD. Um, I've got an interview transcript of one of the heads of the Smithsonian himself saying that Nashville was put on an ancient city. Cincinnati was on an ancient city. What were the others? I think he said Louisville and Pittsburgh. This is not anything you're ever going to hear about in
Mm.
school, but we built our cities on top of Tartarian style ancient
Yeah.
empires. Only my opinion is that they weren't Tartarians, they were Phoenicians or somebody from the Middle East. Maybe there was Hebrew people over here too, and possibly Egyptians in the Grand Canyon and all that good
Yeah.
stuff.
What do you think is the modern desired outcome of the destiny of America? Where do you think they want all this to go? Of course, you can see the transhuman agendas bubbling through, but there seems to be many more layers, as there always is. Many believe that there's a depopulation agenda, that there is a desire to develop AI enough to have it govern the planet, basically. A lot of possibilities for the outcome here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, there is that faction of elites, just to use that word broadly, who want depopulation. I think that's clear when you look into Bill Gates and the Melinda Gates Foundation, and even in modern days, like on podcasts, the girl who was dating or married to Elon Musk was talking
Yeah.
about it, talking about how we're about to lose. And it was a crazy figure. It was like half of the world's population. She was saying what we were about to lose. And it's like, what are you talking about? And that's dark. And I think that goes back to my theory here that the Illuminati eventually did come in here and take over some of this, some of the bloodlines and the government and all that. So there's a dark faction here. And I know another thing here. This might be a good time to read this to answer your question here. Like in regards to where do they want this to go? Here's that Reuters that quote from Reuters. They said the vision for Greenland could include a hub for artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, space launches, micronuclear reactors, and high-speed rail. So I think they want to do that not just in Greenland, they want to do that here and everywhere else. We're starting to see that in Europe as well. Like they're arresting people over there for social media posts
Yeah.
as we speak.
That's crazy.
It's getting the noose is getting tighter and tighter and tighter on the peasants or what is the people of the earth. They consider us to be peasants, and it's going towards 15-minute corporate smart cities. And I say corporate because that's what Peter Thiel was researching recently. He was researching corporate
Yeah.
cities, which is, like Oak Ridge, Tennessee would be a good one. They put that in the 40s to help build, as a part of the Manhattan Project, to help build the bomb. It's a secret city they built out in the middle of Tennessee. At the height of the war, it had like 70 some thousand people living there. And it was a corporate city. So you you just show up and you work for your company, and then your needs are provided for. Your basic needs are quote unquote provided to you. So they'll give you housing. They give you they did this with the coal miners too. They give them like a food stamp. They went, instead of money, they give you stuff that you can spend within the corporate city. That's the revival of that meshed with the 15-minute cities is what I'm calling, the 15-minute corporate cities. That's where I think they're wanting to go with some of this. And it's we're talking about 1984 George Orwell stuff. We're talking about, okay, Trump wants to send a National Guard into Memphis. I saw that happen this week. Okay, yeah, they have a crime problem, but what happens if the National Guard decides to stay and we have military police running our cities? That's not good. That's 1984. So I think we could see multiple things happen here in the future, but it does seem to be headed towards the digital IDs. I haven't mentioned
Yeah,
that
I
yet.
think of
That's where it seems to be
these
headed.
surveillance mechanisms and all
Hmm.
of the law enforcement and control mechanisms that this administration is putting into place right now under the guise of illegal aliens and some of the other problems that they cite is the reason for this. But fast forward to a few years ahead when the pendulum swings back, because the pendulum is always swinging back and forth. When the other party gets in power, what are they going to utilize these surveillance and control systems for? And it's only going to get more all encompassing, and the technology is just going to continue to grow. The question is, how are we supposed to navigate through all this, right?
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. The pendulum is always swinging. There's a great hope in that because maybe regardless of how I've come across at some points in this interview, I am not black pilled. I do have hope. I run on hope. And I think we have a lot of hope. And I think the hope is lies within podcasts like yours, and hopefully the one that I do, the show I do as well, and all the
Yeah.
others. This whole community. I mean, by knowing all this, it's not meant to bring you down. It's meant to strengthen you because knowledge is power. And if we don't know what they're doing or how they operate or what their operation plans for the future are, then we're just going to be, the guy from 1984 being
Yeah.
surveilled. So I forgot his name, but
The
yeah.
last few minutes we have, is there anything that we didn't get to that you'd like to cover? Any final thoughts before we close out?
Yeah. I wanted to touch on the goddess thing maybe a
Sure.
little bit more, but not super long. I just think that that's such an interesting thread to all this is the goddess worship because it kind of ties in with the Phoenicians and like the goddess cult of Ishtar that I've been researching and the Templars and all that. And what you see is that with the order, alongside of that is the bloodline. And you get all this crazy occult knowledge in there with that. Like every ruler, Queen Elizabeth included, because we know she had John D there with her. They always had an occult handler. All the rulers did, and so there's always this occult teaching being taught to the nations, and a lot of it goes back to goddess worship. And I just never hear that being talked about. And what I found was I was looking at three subjects independently, and I found that there was a major connection between all three. One was ancient technology, or I'm sorry, ancient America, and the other was the goddess thing, Ishtar, and the other was the Templars. I was studying all three independently, and I come to find that they were all linked up, and there was major connections to them. And I found this Pike letter, Albert Pike letter. I got to just throw this in at
Yeah.
the end here. Um, this is crazy. Um, Actually, I should say that Scott Walter brought this to light. I didn't find it; he found it, but I find it to be interesting. It's a real Pike letter from to one of his fellow Masons, William McLeod Moore. And this is, I think that just points to everything we've talked about today. Pike said that, of course, Pike's a huge
Yeah.
Mason, huge figure in Masonry. He said in the letter that he went out west looking for the signs, symbols, and tokens left behind by our brothers and fellow Knights Templar who coveted the goddess. He said they ventured out west looking for New Jerusalem, also known as Francis Bacon's New Atlantis. He's talking about Templars being here before Columbus, looking for the site of a building site for New Atlantis. And in the time being, they're venerating goddess worship.
Hmm.
And I was like, whoa, the stuff that we're not taught in
Yeah.
school is awesome.
It's so interesting because we
So,
have such a patriarchal, spiritual, or religious foundation for this country. It would seem no one would ever think that it's steeped in goddess worship at its roots.
yeah, and I think you see it in the Statue of
Mm.
Liberty too. I mean, I think I brought that up earlier, but that was originally to be in Port Said, Egypt, and it was an unfinished project over there. It was offered to the order over here, who Pike, of course, was a part of. And so it was basically like French occultists who knew Egyptian occultists passed it along to American Freemasons. And it was a Roman goddess. I feel like it was probably going to originally be an Isis figure, but somehow it got morphed into a Roman goddess that Virgil talked about. And Virgil is the guy who wrote the poem where we get Norvis Ordo Seclorum on the dollar bill in the first place. So these guys are just slipping clues in here every which way. And yeah, you're right. I mean, the goddess thread here is very potent, and I think it's interesting that it's there and it just doesn't get a lot of stage time. Estrella is another one. Major Estrella goddess connections to America. Estrella, real quick, is Virgo. Um, it, it's a symbol that we find at Templar sites, is the Virgo symbol, much like the Triquerta, but it's associated with the golden age, and Virgo is August to September 22nd, and our constitution was signed in Virgo.
Interesting.
So this, you can go just as deep as you want to go with this stuff, man.
Have you looked at all into Baphomet worship that supposedly the Templars were into?
Yeah, I've looked into Elvis Levi and his interpretation of that, which was meant to be, according to the Hebrew figures that he put on on his Baphomet, it was meant to be a combination of Semyaza, a male entity, and Lilith, a female entity, and thus the Baphomet represented an androgynous
Mm-hmm.
entity, and that fits because that the Templars, like illustrated in Pike's letter, did venerate goddesses. They wherever they went. I mean, I've got a letter from 1226 about German Templars building a temple to Ishtar, and they thought that they were in communication with
Mm.
Ishtar. And this guy talked about it. He's like, "Yeah, if I'm having revelations, she's telling me build me a temple. I'm Ishtar." So they built the temple there, and I forgot where I was going with that, but what did you say a minute ago?
The Baphomet. Um,
Oh,
mhm.
with Baphomet. So yes, it all ties in because if you look at the old temples to Ishtar, the original temples to Ishtar back in Babylon, and maybe even Sumer, but for sure Babylon, androgyny is a huge part of temple
Mm.
culture. All the priests and priestesses were trying to become androgynous in a temple of Ishtar to become more like the gods. So there's a connection there between the Baphomet being androgynous and goddess worship in general.
It's so interesting, man. There's so much we could get to. We'll have to definitely have you back on. Before I let you go, remind the audience how they can get your podcast and find out all about you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Enjoyed talking to you today. This is the first time we've
Yeah.
met, so I'm happy to make your acquaintance. Man, it was a good
Hopefully, many
conversation.
more in the future.
I love. Yeah, let's do many more. So yeah, I'm Tim Constantine. I have a show called the Six Sensory Podcast, spelled out SIX. I'm on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, Instagram, and Patreon. And yeah, the best places and the quickest places to find me out of all that would probably be Spotify and YouTube. But yeah,
Awesome, man.
check
Well,
it out.
thank you so much. This was fascinating. We will definitely be doing this again. Until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. We'll talk again tomorrow. Are you and your family prepared for an emergency? Maybe the fake alien invasion. Now is the time to prepare yourself and your family for any event. Check out Prep Starts Now. Their mission is to provide high-quality preparedness products that empower individuals and families to be ready for any situation. They're committed to delivering reliable, trusted gear to ensure your safety, security, and peace of mind in times of need. Their product selection is carefully curated to provide you with the essential gear you need to stay prepared. From emergency kits to tactical tools, every item is chosen for its reliability and practicality. Prep Starts Now understands the importance of family, and their goal is to equip you with everything you need to build a solid plan for your family's preparedness. In today's ever-changing world, being prepared is more important than ever, and Prep Starts Now is here to help you and your family stay ready with quality products and practical guidance. Use the link in the description and get 15% off your order.